Hey everybody, we're back again with Paul Craig Roberts, long awaited by all our viewers for his next interview. And today's is very important considering what is going on with Ukraine and Russia and Trump's response to it or non-response. Now, Paul, as I recall, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we did a podcast on how Ukraine turns into nuclear war. Are we closer than ever?
Uh, well, yes and no. Um, what has happened again is that the attack on Russian strategic forces, which under Russian war doctrine requires a major strategic response.
Right.
Uh, this has been shoved aside by Putin's government.
Right.
They say that the attack on the two bridges that collapsed two railway bridges and the attacks on the strategic bombing bases are not acts of war, they are acts of terrorism. And therefore, Putin has avoided having to respond.
Well, Paul, in the column that you did today, you talked about how alarming it was that either Trump did not know about it, was not informed about this attack, or he was informed and says that he wasn't in order to not take blame for it. So you're saying the fact that Ukraine went ahead, with or without our consent, to attack these strategic bombers that are lined up in the clear view because of the peace treaty that we have. They were sitting ducks, but that was the peace treaty's provisions to have them out there visible so each side could check on each other. And Ukraine went ahead and destroyed 20 of their advanced bombers. So that in itself is very serious.
Yes, that's what is serious. Um, Everyone knows that under Russian war doctrine, an attack on any aspect of the triad, any aspect of the Russian strategic forces, even by a non-nuclear power, which Ukraine is, that such an attack means, in effect, that Putin is required to push the button. It requires what the war doctrine says is a major strategic response. Well, strategic generally means intercontinental missiles. Well, if the Ukrainians somehow on their own did this without any Western or American help, it shows that they were willing to commit an act that under Russian war doctrine could result in a nuclear attack on Europe and the United States. So how is the United States in a position that Ukraine can decide whether or not it is subject to a nuclear attack? This shows total incompetence of the Trump government, that you would ever be in a situation where some other country can commit you to nuclear war. Now, if Trump knew, or his government knew, or the British, the French, whoever knew and didn't tell us, then they are prepared to commit us to incoming ballistic missiles.
Well, Paul, you also said
But
with,
wait just a minute.
go ahead,
This is very important, Larry.
go ahead.
If someone in the Trump administration gave that green light and didn't
Right.
tell Trump, the guy should be immediately picked up, arrested, subject to all kinds of prosecution because he has put us at risk. Now, what saved all this is the same person, Putin, who caused it by his non-responses. The fact he never responds, somebody decided he won't even respond to this. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. The Kremlin went quickly to work to get rid of the incident. It wasn't even an act of war, it was a terrorist act. And as a terrorist act, it's excluded from their war doctrine.
All right, but Paul, you also said what's even more curious is there's reports that Hegseth, the defense secretary, actually was monitoring this as it was happening. So does that mean that he knew it and he didn't tell Trump, or Trump was in on it, or what?
Yes, I don't remember whether it was the defense secretary or Rubio at State, but there definitely was a report. It may have been in the Guardian that one of those two top American officials watched the attack take place. Well, if that's the case, then we did know about it. But you see, the Russians don't care. They've already said it's not an act of war.
And what you're saying is, as Putin continues to draw back and not respond, that increases the chances eventually of war because eventually he's going to have to do something or he'll be deposed, probably replaced by people that are more war hawks than he is.
Yes. In fact, uh, one of the widest circulated newspapers in Russia has said exactly what I've been saying. Hey, look, quit inviting these attacks. And the military blog that the military does and reads, they say the same thing. Look, the longer it is before Putin responds, the more provocations we're going to get, the more dangerous they're going to be, and the ultimate response is going to be horrific. And so the pressure from media, from military blogs are coming in on Putin. But so far, the whole Putin government is resisting any acknowledgement that this was an act of war that requires a response from the Russian state. So they're denying that. In other words, they're so desperate for a peace settlement, they will accept any humiliation, any.
So far.
And so they're going to get more humiliations. Now, I don't see how Putin can possibly think anything can come out of these negotiations. Here they are in negotiations, and the nuclear triad is attacked by the negotiating partner, most likely fronting for us or the British. I don't think that attack could have been organized without Western participation, but I don't know that.
Yeah, I was going to say, with that kind of technology that was needed to coordinate that, we would have to be helping them, or some of the Western nations would have to be helping them, the way I see it. But also, Paul, you say also ominous in this is that this is another sign that the Trump administration is falling apart. It really doesn't have the power to change things as promised because they're being hit on all sides. Lawfare, the Congress, everything to stymie his agenda to make things hopefully better. Correct. So this is another sign you're saying that Trump may not be able to deliver what he wanted to.
If Trump knew, then in effect it's a declaration of war against Russia to attack their nuclear triad. If he didn't know, but somebody in his government green lighted it, that person usurped the power of the president. Only the power of the president can decide whether or not we go to war. In fact, under the original Constitution, only Congress could decide. So um, the fact that this attack took place, no matter who you blame it on, if we say the Ukrainians did it on their own, then look at the situation it puts the United States in. It puts the United States in a situation where another country can cause a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. Well, how can that power get out of the hands of the President of the United States? This should scare people to death. It's not even up to us whether or not we choose to go to war. The Ukrainians can impose it on us. And the only reason it didn't happen was Putin said, oh, it wasn't an act of war, it was terrorism.
But eventually, he can't
Vince,
continue.
he, you see, that's what I said. The big circulation newspaper, the military blog, they already sound just like me. Hey, you got to stop the non-response because it produces ever more dangerous provocations.
No.
And if you keep accepting anything, you're going to get it. And so I think that kind of pressure eventually, the provocations will get so extreme. It's already extreme. They several times have had to close all four Moscow airports from civilian flight. Schools get hit. All kinds of facilities get hit throughout Russia. People are getting killed, civilians, and they never do anything. Putin never does anything about it. And I can't understand how he thinks he's going to get any kind of a peace settlement, which to him, it doesn't mean ending the conflict in Ukraine. That's not what a peace settlement means. It means a great power agreement to call off all the hostility against Russia, that it has to be declared over and done with. And that's what he means. Well, he's not going to get that out of the United States. The military security complex isn't going to give up an enemy and go broke. It's not going to happen. And it's so unrealistic on Putin's part.
Okay,
It's
but what about Putin's statement today, or in the last day with Trump? The conversation, as reported, is that Putin says he has to respond to this. Empty words?
Yes, but it'll be some low-level response. It's not going to be the strategic response the Russian war doctrine requires. It'll be he'll have to do something just for the Russian press.
But
Uh,
getting back to how Trump is being stymied on all sides, you say it's similar to what Reagan was going through when you were in the Reagan administration.
yeah, yeah, they don't really understand about government, and they think the president has all this power and he can make decisions and do things. And if not, at least he can lobby Congress, and that there's actually power and control in the Oval Office. And there is a little bit, but uh, the government is so huge now. You just think back into the 1800s, go back to the 19th century. Yeah, the government was tiny. The president could just about run it. the executive branch out of the uh, uh, Abe Lincoln didn't have any massive government bureaucracy, and neither did any of the early presidents. So this massive government bureaucracy we have now is largely a product of Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's unmanageable. There's too much. There are hundreds of presidential appointees. The president doesn't know who they are. He doesn't choose them. There is some kind of a committee formed to staff the administration for him, for the president. He can maybe choose cabinet secretaries, a dozen people. And most of the things are not filled by presidential action. So all those people get in there. Who puts them in there? Well, the various interest groups that control the government through campaign contributions. So the military security complex, they'll fill. The pharmaceutical industry will fill the ones important to them. Agribusiness will fill the ones important to them, and so on down the line. And these people there, they are serving the interests that put them there. That's their job. And then by serving those interests, when they leave government, they get some big job with the interest group that they served. And that's the way the government works. So they basically do what they want. Now we can talk about what you raised twice. Is there really a Trump government? Well, you saw, I'm sure, uh, just recently, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, announced that the CDC would no longer recommend the COVID vaccine for pregnant women and healthy children. He also said that there will be no more vaccines without testing. And he described the testing that had to take place. Well, the very next day, the head of the CDC announced exactly the opposite. They approved vaccines for the COVID vaccine for pregnant women and healthy children. And they approved the latest vaccine without any test. So here is a subordinate to the secretary giving him the finger, ignoring him, and issuing contrary regulations to what the secretary has publicly announced. Well, so you see this across the board, and particularly in this attack on Soviet strategic forces. Once again, it doesn't matter who did it. The fact that it was done shows that the president is not in charge of whether or not the United States is going to be in a nuclear war. It's up to somebody else's decision. Zelensky's, some neoconservative policymaker, the CIA, the British intelligence, who they are making decisions that commit us to the possibility of nuclear war.
No.
Well, this should scare people to death. It should be all kinds of discussion. How can we possibly be in a situation where we can't even control whether or not we're going to be in a nuclear war? That Zelensky can decide it, or some covert CIA operation, or some neoconservative in the Pentagon. They can make this decision. That's what this attack on the Russian strategic forces proves. It proves that we have no control over whether or not we're going to end up in nuclear war. So whether Trump knew it or didn't know it didn't make any difference. he's got no control. Whew, it's even worse. The worst thing is if the decision was made by Ukraine and nobody in the West knew anything about it.
Yeah.
Just imagine. I mean, you see, as you know, I've long said that the likely cause of nuclear war will be a mistake. Well, I didn't realize we were this open to mistakes. It's it's horrifying. It doesn't make any, and there's no discussion. Hell, I can't even get Johnson's Russian list to publish my article pointing it out. It's not part of the narrative.
Yeah.
So, so you can see how dangerous it is. And of course, I think it's Putin's fault. He's he's had all these red lines, never enforced. He always turns the other cheek or plays like nothing happened. And now they're playing like there was no war.
Yeah,
Uh,
you've been saying this all along. They keep pushing, pushing. Putin keeps not responding, retreating. Eventually, something has to really erupt. You've been saying that all along for the past couple of years that we've been doing these podcasts.
right. And and if Putin had followed Russian law, it would have erupted now. But he quickly went to work with Lavrov and the, the Kremlin and redefined what the attack was. And by redefining it as an act of terrorism, it excludes the response that the Russian war doctrine requires. So now, what are the neoconservatives going to conclude from that? They're going to conclude he's so averse to war, we can do anything, and he will do nothing. And so the next thing is going to be worse. What'll it be? How are they going to nuke Moscow?
Yeah, I mean, eventually it's going to be Putin has to act or allow the West to take Russia,
Yes.
not just Ukraine, but to reestablish itself in Russia as they were doing for a while before Putin tried to clear some of that. So it's either respond or let the West
Surrender.
invade Russia.
He's going to have to fight or surrender. And uh, with all the evidence he has of the West never keeping any agreement, of the West sabotaging every attempt to resolve the Ukraine war. Remember, he practically had it resolved with Zelensky a long time ago. And Boris Johnson went over there and gave orders to Zelensky, who then turned around and reneged on the agreement.
Yeah.
So every time, and yet Putin continues to put his trust in agreements that he has no evidence the West would keep. I mean, the whole problem he faces now is that the United States did not keep its promise not to move NATO 1 inch to the
Right,
east.
right.
The problem is NATO owned Russia's borders. And as I've said in recent columns, uh, what Putin means by a peace agreement is a rollback of NATO to the 1997 borders.
Which is entirely reasonable. I keep using the analogy with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when Khrushchev of the then Soviet Union brought nuclear missiles 90 miles off our shore. We almost went to nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Now it's reversed. We bring in more missiles closer and closer to Russia's border, but we say, it's not the same thing. It's not analogous.
Yeah, it's it's a it's a mess, and I think that it's Putin's fault, and I think he does not understand the West, and it's really a shame See, Putin is a reasonable, rational, emotional, stable person. He's not a warmonger. The West should be supporting him.
Yeah.
We should be supporting Putin. Instead, we're trying to push him into war.
He's always depicted as a bad guy. Talking about how the revolving door and how all these people in key positions leave and become lobbyists, showing what their real interests are. It's monetary, not the interests of the U.S. Lloyd Austin is now a lobbyist.
Right.
So there you go.
Uh, that's exactly it. They're concerned with their career, not the country, and so they don't even think about the dangerous issues. To them, what's dangerous is not getting that job they're working for.
Right.
And so I hope that the message comes across that if Putin wasn't so determined to avoid war, we might not be here right now. And, and it's got to be, something has to be done, that something like this can't happen again, that there can't be another attack on Russian strategic forces that we don't know about, that commits us to incoming missiles, and we don't even know that it's been done. I mean, that's worse than if we know and did it.
Now, look at the other steps of escalation recently, where Europe now is giving the go-ahead to have Ukraine fire its missiles deeper and deeper into Russian territory proper. So, step by step, it is escalating.
Yeah, it's escalating. And one thing we didn't talk about is how did the Ukrainians or British intelligence or the CIA or whoever did this, how did they get all those trucks
Right.
full of drones into Russia and have them travel thousands of miles? They didn't hit Siberia from Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
They hit Siberia from a truck parked in Siberia. How did this happen? Where's Russian intelligence? Now, you could say, well, the Russians have never stopped trade with Ukraine even during the war. I think the Russians still provide them with oil and gas so they can carry on the war. I mean, that's how crazy the Kremlin is. Oh, we might lose a ruble of profit if we don't supply our enemy so he can fight us. You know, this you can't think of a more absurd war than this one that Putin has fought in Ukraine. It's laughable. So anyhow, this trade's still going on, as I understand it, and trucks passing across the borders. So maybe that's how the trucks got across full of missiles, because the Russian authorities are used to trucks coming and going across the borders, and nobody looked. Um, Apparently, one of the truck drivers somewhere, after they were way out in Russia, got suspicious and stopped the truck to have some kind of look to see what really was, and consequently, those missiles were fired prematurely. I still don't think the Russian intelligence put two and two together, um, um, because they did end up successfully damaging or destroying some of that strategic bombing fleet. Well, how does this happen? How can it be that you got trucks full of drones with Ukrainian operators of the drones? We assume, I mean, maybe it was British intelligence, maybe CIA, but they're driving around all over Russia, getting positioned to hit these strategic airfields.
I was going to say, what about our intelligence? It seems more and more clues that we were
We
in on
did.
this. We allowed it if we didn't instigate it.
It's hard to, yeah, why wouldn't we know? I mean, if we know where the planes are, because they have to sit in the open, it's like you said, we have a treaty with Russia that our bombers and their bombers have to be viewable.
Right.
Um, well, somebody had to tell Zelensky that if he did it. If this was purely a Ukraine operation, that's the scariest thing of all. If it's purely a Ukraine operation, because it proves, to repeat myself for the fourth, fifth, sixth time, that we have no control over whether or not we get involved in a nuclear war.
Uh,
And I can't imagine anything more irresponsible. And how, who made Zelensky feel he could do something like this? If it's true that we simply didn't know, then if I was Trump, I would have immediately ordered the assassination of Zelensky. He'd be dead just like that because he did something that if Putin had obeyed Russian law, we might not be here. You can't leave that guy out there doing what's he going to do next time? And so the fact that Trump does nothing, he's done nothing. The American government has done nothing, and we are almost committed to nuclear war. It's it's mindless. You can't explain it.
I can't see Trump giving the go-ahead on this because, he's been trying to defuse the situation. And as you said previously in podcast, he doesn't want the distraction of a war like that to interfere with his domestic agenda. So to me, it seems unlikely that Trump was really in on this.
Well, then it's scary that there's somebody making decisions that would unleash nuclear war, and we don't know anything about it.
And I think the way it started, Paul, correct me if you have a different view of it, but it would start with Putin responding to some of the European countries that are sending missiles and all that. Since we have to defend European NATO members, then that draws us into it. But it would start with an exchange not just between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and some of the European countries that have been supporting Ukraine and supplying materials. And then we'd have to respond to that. And that's how it develops into a big nuclear war.
Well, you can't know how it would start. I mean, if the Kremlin is realistic, they would realize that in advance and say, we have to strike the Americans. Why give them all these warnings and go through these needless steps? We've got to take them out before they have a chance to take us out. So that would be the decision um, a general staff would make. I don't think any general staff would ever say, well, let's provoke them so they attack us first. They would say, let's take them out before they know what's happened.
Well,
Uh,
wrapping it up now, would you say that we're closer to nuclear war now than have been since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis?
well, I think we are because we have this new element of somebody not of us making war decisions that are known on the Russian war doctrine to require a strategic response. So, what if they do that again? How many times can Putin call a serious attack on Russian strategic forces an act of terrorism? How many times can he do that? Um, it looks like to me he's just about used up all of his blindness to real events. I don't know. And like I say, there are newspapers pointing this out and military blogs. And I think that's a new development. They now sound like me. And of course, not everybody in Russia. I think the westernized intelligentsia, um, uh, they're delusional like the Kremlin. And their line is we'll just take whatever humiliation it takes to avoid war. But you can't avoid war that way. It just encourages more and more and more. And sooner or later, your only choice is fight or surrender. And I think Putin's getting close to that point. And I think also uh, by Putin redefining an act of war as an act of terrorism, he's shown the American policymakers and the European ones that he'll do anything to avoid conflict. So we can do whatever we want. And that, I think, brings us closer than we've ever been to the outbreak of nuclear war. I just don't think Putin would be allowed to surrender.
Well,
And so if you look at that nuclear clock, they have it, I don't know where they have it now, very close to midnight. I think it's 1 second from midnight or 1 nanosecond from midnight, or else the Russians have to surrender. And maybe they will. Maybe they'll say, well, we'd rather be American puppets than dead. It's like some of the leftists back during the Cold War, they'd rather be red than dead.
right.
Maybe the Russians would rather be American puppets than dead. It's entirely possible. A lot of people don't particularly want to die. So it may just wear them down, and they don't have bellicose leaders, the Russians. Uh, so it may just wear them down. But clearly, it's an error for the Kremlin to think it can have a mutual security agreement with a nation with a country, the United States. We're no longer a nation, we're a country that has a doctrine of its hegemony. You can't make deals with a country that claims hegemony over you. And nobody has repudiated the Wolfowitz doctrine. It's still there. Uh, some people say, well, it's really not Wolfowitz doctrine. He took credit. Well, it doesn't matter whose doctrine it is. It's a doctrine of hegemony, you know? And if you have that, how do you have mutual agreements with other countries that put them on equal standing? You don't. And so Putin's unrealism seems to be simply you can't believe the doctrine of American hegemony. And I think that these kinds of failures are deadly. The kinds of failures of realization that we see in the Kremlin are deadly. They're deadly failures. And the hopes are false hopes. And between the inability to recognize the actual facts and the false hopes, how do you avoid war? You can't make a correct decision. We can be thankful, I think, that Putin said, hey, let's ignore this attack on our strategic forces. Let's quickly redefine it as something else. Because it saved, it put off a strategic response. But who's learned the lesson? Did we learn one? Has anybody said, how in the world could we be in a position that Zelensky can commit us to nuclear war with Russia? How, we have no control over our own fate. Zelensky does. He controls it. Well, people we should be up in arms. Go away. You're making too much noise. That's my cat demanding her shrimp. It's
It could be a listening device, that cat.
yeah, but I see you see what I mean. This is so serious. It's so serious it's hard to express it. And there's no discussion.
Yeah.
None. And nobody has said, hey, look how close we came to.
What's also,
I give up for now. I
you know,
don't know what to think
what's
of it.
also ironic, Paul, is there was that blow up in the White House between Putin and between Zelensky and Trump, where Trump kicked him out, essentially. So it's like Trump showed him Trump was in control. Now it looks like Zelensky's in control.
Yeah. Well, it's true. Trump has put Zelensky in control because who is who is Putin negotiating with? Zelensky, not Trump.
Yeah, yeah,
Zelensky's already said he doesn't accept any aspect of the Russian conditions. So what's the purpose of the negotiations?
yeah,
Why does Putin accept fake negotiations?
yeah,
I saw some Russians on responding on a blog, and they said, "What the hell are we doing there negotiating with them? Why aren't we delivering them an ultimatum?"
yeah,
And so, Putin may wear his support out. Uh, and people get tired of fighting when they're not allowed to finish the fight.
yeah.
And I, so anyhow, Larry, I hope the message gets through that the United States has no control whatsoever on whether or not we end up in a nuclear war. That
Another,
we are so powerless that Zelensky can make that determination.
another dire note to end on, Paul. So until next time, if there is a next time, Paul Craig Roberts, thanks very much for being with us, I
Okay.
guess. Although now I'm even more alarmed. But until next time, thanks, Paul.
Till next time, Larry. So long.